Bearded Lady is a combination of two of my favorite articulated streamer patterns, Kelly Gobb's Boogeyman and the Conrad Sculpin. You can see it's got a nice broad profile. You want fish to see this big silhouette, come over and check things out. The real key to the fly is the lip, which is created by coating a loop of monofilament with clear cure goo, which is a UV epoxy. You can see how it locks that head of the fly together, including the barbell eyes, which are really immersed in it. The results are real durable. If you bounce them off rocks, they aren't going to break, which is good. You can also see it's got an articulated connection, and when you combine that with the lip, you get a fly that's going to swim in a way that most streamer patterns really can't match. I'm going to start by attaching the barbell eyes and the monofilament loop to the front hook. The first step in this is to build up a thread head. It seems a little bit backwards, but this is how I do it. Once you have that, attach the barbell eyes just behind that thread head. If you use strong thread, you'll be able to lash those onto the hook shank so that they won't rotate or slide. They should be nice and tight. The best way to accomplish this is by sort of just figure eighting around the barbells and then pulling nice and tight with the thread. And if you repeat this a few times, you'll find that you can really lock those on there. Some people like to glue them on, but I usually feel like I don't need to do that, especially since I'm going to really lock it together with the UV epoxy at the end. Once you have that locked on there, you're ready to attach the lip. You just sort of leave the thread behind the eyes. Pick a loop of monofilament that's the size of the lip you want, and I just go in front and behind a few times. And then I go in between the monofilament and the hook shank. So you can see I'm going in between there. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to control the angle that that lip sort of descends at. And once you get it, you just lock that down behind and make a couple crosses. And then you're just going to clip that monofilament off. And then you're going to finish off your thread and trim it off and set this front hook off to the side until we tie up the back hook. The tail of the fly is pretty simple. Basically, you're just tying a crystal bugger and then adding a wing. And the wing is going to be a combination of marabou and mallard flank. And I always like to use different colors within the same fly, so I add a red tail. Usually I'll use some bright color for the tail. I don't tie a lot of solid bright colored flies. So you see I'm going to wind on this pearl chenille and the hackle to basically get to the point where you're tying a woolly bugger. And then once that's ready, you're going to add a marabou wing on top of that. In this case I'll use black. So I make sure that's tied in nice and tight. I like to really lock every part of the fly down so that it doesn't spin. Once you're convinced you've got that locked in, add the mallard flank on top. I either use white or gray. I usually use two feathers. You can see the two tails sticking out. And once again, you just lock that in and tie a nice head. You'll be ready to go. So once you have the back hook ready, you've got to add the articulated connection. I use 30-pound amnesia. One of the nice things about amnesia is that it holds a nice loop. It doesn't tend to kink, which makes that fly swing nice and free. I just throw one single craft sword bead on there to sort of form the loop. You can get these pretty cheap. This is a plastic bead. I don't like glass beads because they will break when you bounce them off a rock. And you can see how nice and easy that'll swing. And that's what's going to give you that nice articulated action. So when connecting it to the front hook, this is another area where strong thread is real important. I just lash that on the back half of the front hook. You can see it's really just thread wraps. And I fold back the two tag ends of the Amnesia and wrap them up nice and tight. And I caught a lot of fish on these, and I never had this fall apart, so I don't really worry about this being the limiting factor. And just trim those off, and then I'm gonna tie over top of that basically the repeat of what's on the back hook. So I tie in my pearl chenille and my hackle. And I'm going to make sure I leave enough room on the head that I can spin the deer hair on there, because I want that front half of the hook to be all head. I like a big head. So you got to make sure you leave room when you're tying that sort of woolly bugger type part of the hook. Basically, this part is just, keeping that hook gap open, because you want the hook to penetrate. And then I add the wing just like I did before. It's going to be black marabou and then mallard flank on top. And here again, you really have to lock everything down, because you don't want that spinning as you tie the fly, or if you get on the water, you don't want it to spin in a fish's mouth. It's just kind of, it'll probably still catch fish, but it's ugly. And then the flank. So you really want to lock this down. I always leave a little gap here. I finish it up real tight, and just give it a good tug. Make sure it's not going to spin. Then you just trim those ends off. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a collar right on top of that. And this is why it's important to make sure it's tight there, because you don't want this to spin all around the hook shank. You want it to spread around the top half. So you give it a couple tight wraps, push down, and just give it some nice pulls. And you see how it flares out, but it doesn't spin. It's only on the top half. So that's going to give you a nice broad collar. And then you just spin deer hair on that bare hook in sequence. And I like a big head, so I'm not shy about getting hair on there. And giving it nice tight pulls in between, make sure that deer hair isn't going to spin too. So I mean, you don't really need a lot of wraps to spin deer hair, but you do need to make sure they're tight. I use this gel spun thread, which is real nice for spinning deer hair, because it's very strong, but it also doesn't cut the hair. And so once you get that head all tied up, you're just going to finish up right in front behind the eyes. So now that we got all this deer hair on here, we got to trim it to shape. For the bottom, I just trim it flat. So basically that hair is going to be even with the barbell eyes on the bottom. You don't want that getting in the way of any hookups. So you got to keep your hook gap open. So you just trim that flat. And I like these to be broad more than tall. Basically, you're looking for a sculpin shape here. So I just trim that hair to shape. And this razor blade's getting a little dull, so it won't cut as nice as a new one will. You can see me hacking there. But, it doesn't really matter if the head's pretty. The fish don't really care. So once you get that head to a nice shape, you're ready to fill in the lip. Now the thick clear cure goo is the best for making bigger lips. Basically what you do is you cover all the exposed thread, fill in this gap between the eyes and the deer hair, cover up the top. You really want to fill in the whole head. Make sure it's all locked together. And you fill in the lip. If you keep the syringes in the refrigerator, it'll be a little bit more viscous, which makes it easier to work with. You can see I've got a rotary vise here, which is really essential because the goo will flow as you work with it. And if you can't rotate, it'll just flow right off the monofilament and you'll end up with a pile of goo and no lip. So you just keep rotating it, and when you start to see a shape that you like, you hit it with a lamp. And it'll take, maybe a minute or so, depending on how big the lip is, for that to solidify. So you've got to keep rotating it. Just find a nice balance so that it doesn't flow out of the shape that you want. And you'll end up with a pretty nicely shaped lip. And the regular cure goo is a little bit tacky, so they have this non-tack stuff which you can brush on, and that stuff, it's mostly just to get the stickiness off, but it's the same deal. You just hit it with the lamp and it'll solidify, and it makes a nice glossy coating. So here's the finished fly. In dirty water especially, the black and white combination is my favorite. I usually like to throw a brighter color in there, in this case red. A lot of times I'll use chartreuse or orange. Having multiple colors certainly doesn't seem to turn the fish off, so there it is.